think we're ready to go. So, this is Robbie Luckett. I'm here with Lottie Thornton. Today's date is April 24th, 2013. We are at the Margaret Walker Center in Air Hall. Ms. Thornton, do I have your permission to record this interview?
You do.
Can you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you grew up?
Okay. I'm really a native of Grenada, Mississippi. I had two older sisters, and both of them had been to Jackson State, so that's really why I chose it. I had won a scholarship through the Masons on December 4th, 1939, and that scholarship gave me the opportunity, I won first place in it, to go to any state college, any college within the state of Mississippi, and any college, well, one college in Atlanta. And I chose Jackson State because my sisters had been here. When I came, it was the fall of 1939. I enrolled in 1940, September, and I graduated in 1944. And we had very small classes then because the entire student body was very small. But we had good program, we had good teachers, we had good, at least Mr. Reddick's and the staff members had good connections with organizations that we could get money from, because we weren't getting but a very little bit from the state. And they knew how to do that. If he needed money to promote a project or to support a project, he knew the organizations to go to ask for the money, and usually got it. If he did not do the asking, he had somebody else who had some connections with the particular organization, and we got the money. They could get the money. They had no money, but they could get it, and that was the important thing. And in addition to getting just money for a particular project, he would also get, he and anybody who could help him, would also get money for other projects other than the one they started out on. He had us to look back on. I remember one day, I don't remember who was visiting me, so many visitors came. And I was privileged, not only I was privileged, but others too, to meet those people. And one day I started over there, he came and got me out of some class. And when we got almost to I think we were in our hall. When we got almost there, he said, "Get out of those galoshes, Lottie." He didn't want me to meet the people with galoshes on. And there was nothing wrong with it because it was raining. And I usually wear galoshes or boots or something when it's raining. But he was happy to get us to appear on whatever he was doing. And we were happy to do it because, you know, we didn't know what we were doing exactly, except what he told us before the guests came. But in that way, we met a lot of interesting people. He got me a scholarship to I'm trying to think of the group. I don't remember the organization at the moment. I know it, I just can't recall it at the moment, but I will sometimes before we get through, I think. And He also got me a scholarship that year, and I think it was foundation scholarship to go away the next year and study at Ohio State for a master's degree in elementary education. That was a real learning experience in a lot of ways, and an enjoyable one. And some women from Jackson, one was a principal of one of the schools here. The other one was not a principal, but she was by the time she got through with her master's degree. And she was an only child named, her last name was Williams. And she said, I don't want to go home, my mama. That's all she knew to talk about. She wanted to go home. She was the only child. And her mother and father were both living at that time. And I guess she was good and spoiled, used to a lot of attention. And so her mind stayed back in Jackson with her mother and father at that time. She was not married then. And I had to do some reports in some classes that we had together. And every time I did a report and she and Francis were there, when it was over, Lottie was just so proud of you. We're just proud of you. And that was their favorite expression to me. And one of them would say, I never could do that. I just never could do it. You know, no matter what they told me to do or what I agreed to do, I couldn't do that. So we got along well. They in their sphere and I was in my sphere. But I didn't know either one of them before. Of course, they didn't know me before. But whatever we had to do together, we got done beautifully. And I think both of those ladies are dead now. I know Frances is. She was the principal when she came. And the other lady finally got married. Some lady's husband died. And she got, connected with him. She was a very nice person. And I don't think he lived very long, but she stayed married until he died, and then she was single again. I don't remember seeing her maybe once or twice after the death. Frances died before she did. She was principal at Power, if I remember correctly. I mean, Frances. The other one went to Leicester as principal. There used to be a school called Leicester. And she was really happy to get that position because she had been with the Jackson Public Schools for a long time. And I never knew, how well they did, but I assumed they did well because they stayed until death took them, which means that nobody just tried to get rid of them or sought to get rid of them. Now, back to Grenada. My mother and father were from Duck Hill, and so many people laugh when I say it because I never heard of Duck Hill. And we're going back whenever we come as often as we can. The last time we went on a little tour, we went to the church, and they keep it up just beautifully. It's right next to the Black Baptist church there. And they call it Duck Hill Baptist Church, which surprises me 'cause I thought that name would have gone to the white side, but it didn't. They have it. They have a woman who cleans that we met the last time we were down there. And she keeps the place just immaculate, doesn't she? It was really a good visit. Every time I go, if I have the time and somebody's there, and I have cousins all down the Martin Luther King Street nowadays who are close to the church, and I can get in there. And it's right across from the white school our church is, which is a little unusual too. But I had a cousin named Will Brown who bought a lot of property on that street, and some of his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are still there. It was a good buy for him and the family. Now that's Duck Hill. Is there anything else I should mention about Duck Hill? David?
What was it like growing up in Grenada and the Duck Hill area?
Oh, to me, it was all right. I didn't know anything else, you know. So we were in our school, and they were in theirs, and we did what we had money to do, which wasn't a whole lot, and they did what they had money to do, which was a lot more. But as far as any friction or anything, I don't know of any. I just don't, you know. We went outside and they were on theirs, and that was it. But we did have some good teachers, as I think most southern, well, many southern states had, where they had the division. Willie A. Jones was one, and she spelled that. I better not try to spell it. I was trying to remember if she spelled it L-I-A, you know, the end of it, Willia, because Mrs. Wilson, who taught in upper grades and lived there on Harvey Street, did just die if you didn't say Willia A. Jones. She was a good teacher, and everybody was scared of Miss Wilson except a few of us. I wasn't scared of her, but some people were. She was a good teacher, but she was really wanted everything to be done exactly the way she said it. Ernest Keyes, who lived there after then, who worked there after then, and became principal, didn't he? I think so. He and his wife Alice and their daughter lived with Mrs. Wilson, and when Mrs. Wilson died, they inherited her house and lived there until they died, except the daughter. She lives somewhere in Illinois, if she's still living, and I don't know that. But we enjoyed going to school. They put us in plays and took us to Taylorsville and other little places around in Mississippi to present the plays, you know. So we had a lot of chances that some children in Mississippi did not have when it came to participation in other kinds of things, which was good for us. It makes you not, you know, be so afraid to talk to people and to do what you can with them in the community. Some of us made pretty good community workers, and some others didn't bother, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. It does that with everything. So unless you have a specific question.
You mentioned that you had sisters who came to Jackson State.
Yes.
Why did they choose to come to Jackson State?
That's a question I cannot answer, except my father and mother stayed in Duck Hill. My older sister was born there. we had two brothers, which you didn't know, because I don't remember either one of them. They were older than Mildred. And when he got ready to come to Grenada and live, he came because he wanted his children to have a school that ran longer than the short time they ran in Duck Hill. And after he got here, he decided he needed to go to school again. So, you know, we didn't have anything but 10th grade through the 10th grade. That's why my sister and those others went to schools. She chose Jackson State. But some went to Canton and other schools in the state. But that's why they went, because the Grenada school didn't go any farther than the 10th grade. And speaking of my father, he went back to school, and I was telling Margaret the other day, and David, that I remember his teaching sister and me, Mildred, after he learned it in school. He, she, it does. We and they do. And I remember that. Not, you know, it served me well because it helped me to remember. You know, I wouldn't say it do, because I knew it would be does. And everybody didn't have that kind of hands-on training with their parents. But what they knew, they taught us. My mother had an excellent contralto voice. Every community choir that somebody established at the school, she joined. And then people called on her often to go to funerals and do funerals. And one of their favorite songs, and maybe one of hers, was "What Are They Doing in Heaven Today?" Most people don't know that song at all because it's so old, but some of the words I remember. What are they doing in heaven today, where sin and sorrow are all done away, where peace abounds like a river, they say. Oh, what are they doing there now? And they requested that song a great deal, and many others, and she enjoyed doing them. And the last person that I remember before she passed, I was 6th grade when she passed, was Mr. Perkins, a man who just died a few years ago in Jackson. He was Seventh-day Adventist, so he didn't teach here on Saturdays. He didn't teach when I got to Jackson State. He was working there. He got there and got a job. His wife was from Jackson, but he always did something with the community. He could play, and he could sing, and he could train voices, and Mama enjoyed all of that and participated. She was not the only one, because couldn't have a choir with just her, and many others did too. Now that's Jackson. That's the beginning of Jackson State.
What was campus like when you came in 1940? Can you describe it?
Yes. You mean the campus itself, or the
Yes.
campus and the people?
Well, let's start with the campus itself, and then we'll talk about the people.
Okay. The campus itself was a small campus. It had been moved once or twice. Started out in Natchez, and we were almost, they told me, set up over where either Millsaps or Belhaven is, one of those schools. And you might can, document that with something from the library.
Millsaps.
Mm-hmm. And the year I entered, there were 96 people in the whole college. we had a small graduation class in 44, and I was the salutatorian. No, I was the valedictorian. I forget what it was at that time. And my roommate was related to the Alexanders, the education Alexanders. And she was a good math student. Mr. Reddix had taught her in Gary. She was from Gary. And we had a lovely time together. A girl named Ernestine Walters and I were very good friends at Jackson State during the first 2 years, because she married after 2 years. She didn't graduate. She came back later and graduated. She had gone to school with her father. Her mother and father were divorced in Chicago, so she could type and she could do some things that those of us who had gone to school in the South hadn't had the opportunity to do. And her name was Ernestine Walters, and she spelled that E-A-R. She was an only child. And we'd go out to the country. She'd come to Grenada maybe at a holiday, and I'd go to Peleachi. She was from Peleachi. And I would go there for a holiday. And I was out there visiting once. It wasn't a holiday, I don't believe. And I heard the neighbors across the street were white. And I heard a little boy out there saying, "Ernestine, has Frank gone to town?" It was a Saturday. And Ernestine said, "Yes, he's already gone," whatever his name was. He says, "Well, I sure didn't intend for him to get away, 'cause I wanted to come and get a chaw of tobacco, and I thought I would die." I had never seen anybody that little, asking for tobacco. Said he thought he was trying to catch him. So, but they got along just beautifully, like whites and blacks did in a lot of places where they lived close to each other and maybe worked fields together and did things together. All of it was not bad, that's what I'm saying, for everybody. It wasn't bad for me because I didn't work for them, but I did cleaning because I liked to have some money. And my sister Mildred never worked for one of them, not one. She always found better jobs, like in the library or somewhere. Now, that kind of job was really fascinating to her. I didn't care what kind of job I had as long as I was making some money. And there used to be, nobody in here knows about this, there used to be a cake of soap called Beauty Cake. And my daddy would indulge us, and so I got to the place where I was putting Beauty Cake on him every night. Finally, I stopped putting it. And one night he said, "Well, baby, what happened to the Beauty Cake?" I said, "Well, Daddy, I didn't see." He said, "Oh, you didn't see where it was doing any good?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Well, I know what happened now." And it wasn't doing any good, but he just let me do that. And we never did bother about Beauty Cake anymore because we knew it wasn't doing any good for anybody. But I like to sell stuff where I would make a little change, like garden seeds. You send off and get them, and you sell them, and the people would plant them, and they'd get the vegetables and whatever else they had planted. But I always had something going, where I could bring in a little change. After I was older, I was still in school in Grenada. I sold other kinds of things that people could not pay much money for. And I'd have a little money and they'd have a little. There was a mail order house called Walter Fields, and I think it was in Chicago. I think the home place. I'm not sure of that, but I think that's where it was. But my friend Thelma, who has passed on, she was a member of a great big family, the Tom Smith family. Thelma and I would sell things so we could order the 19 cents. Listen to me carefully. The 19 cents Tams that Walter Field used to carry. And 19 cents was a lot of money for us because we didn't have any, But we did that. And it was something that gave us something to do and gave people who had a little money too to buy and dress up in. And they were not bad looking, the Tams and things that they sold. And they sold much more than that. I just remember the Tams because we just loved buying the 19-cent Tams. And that's about what I can remember just offhand, unless you had another question.
Well, you came to Jackson State during the World War II years, and I was wondering how the war impacted your experience here.
That's a good question because it surely did impact us. I didn't come during the war years. At least it hadn't affected us at that time. But when they started talking war, I was telling David Knows the other day, we just got worried because we just knew our brothers, those of us who had brothers, and our cousins like Otis would be going, and the only thing we could think about was they may not ever come back. But so many of them in Grenada got back. They didn't do that everywhere, but a lot of them did. The second year of the war, which was my sophomore year, we really got worried because there was more talk about what was going on and what was going to happen to the soldiers and that kind of thing. And that was upsetting to us. And we worried about the young men from the campus. For one thing, it didn't leave any young men. So that affected us a great deal. But our main concern was not that the boys were going. That was a concern, of course. But the main concern was whether they were going to get back. And many of them did, and some of them didn't. But I don't recall our having a lot of Grenada boys who didn't make it back. I have no idea of the number, but I just know it wasn't a great number. Anything else?
Were there people who stand out in your mind? You mentioned a number of them, but people who particularly stand out in your mind during your years as a student?
Oh, yeah. The first one I think of is Mrs. Willie Dobbs, D-O-B-B-S, Blackburn. Just buried her a few years ago. And I should have come home. I wanted to come home, but something kept me from coming. I must have had something to do. But I wrote up some material about her and sent it to Dr. Talley, who was going to do the eulogy. They just had a graveside service, and she did it because Reverend Johnson was out of town, I think. And I sent her a whole lot of stuff, a lot of which I'm sure she didn't even need, but I didn't know what to send, so I sent a lot of stuff because I knew a lot about Mrs. Blackburn. First of all, Mrs. Blackburn was the daughter of a man that was referred to as a silver-tongued orator from Atlanta, Georgia. His name's, all I can remember now is Mr. Dobbs. But he was over what was the organization that promoted my getting the orator contest? Masons, right. He was over the Masons in Georgia. At that time, they could have more than one state. Georgia and Mississippi, and I don't know if he had another state or not, but anybody loved to hear him speak. He was just wonderful. He and his wife had 5 daughters. They all are graduates of Spelman. And most of them, if not all of them, were teachers. And Mrs. Blackburn came to Jackson and married Ben Allen Blackburn, and his father was over Negro education, whatever that is, in Mississippi. And she stayed here after she got here for the rest of her life, until she retired. Anybody would enjoy her classes because she herself was a brilliant teacher. She could do a lot of things. I danced a lot in those days, and I thought I would never get tired, and my daddy said, "You will." Age will take care of that, and it will. But she did a lot of things other than just teach the books that we had, because she knew a lot of things to do. She would give us plays and rehearsals and take us different places to perform the plays. Now, that's one, Mrs. Blackburn. Okay, Willie Jones was another one. She was a woman. And neither one of these women had finished college when they were teaching me. Miss Jones and Ada Gators, you met Ada in Chicago, would do a lot of things with us, extra things, I mean. We enjoyed them and they enjoyed us. Margaret was so glad to get to Ada's house in Chicago. This was some money that we had gotten from Southern Education Foundation. And it gave that program money to educate a number of students. I don't remember exactly how many we had, but they provided all of the money for them to go to school at Jackson State. It was a master's degree program. Ophelia, what's Ophelia's name that worked in the kindergarten? Ophelia. I can't think of her last name right now.
Ophelia
Kelly, yeah, that's right. Ophelia was one of those girls, and some of them have gone on. But they didn't have to pay a thing. And it's very interesting to remember sometimes how little they thought they were getting, and they were getting a whole year's schooling, for nothing. But I guess some people feel that the rest of us owe them, a year's education. Nobody paid for my education but what I won with the contest and what my folks gave. The first year that I was at Jackson State, my parents didn't have to pay but $2.60 because I had that scholarship money. Mr. Dansby, who was the former president of Jackson State, my daddy or my sister or somebody put him in charge of looking after my money and me. Every month, and board, room and board, after they got the dormitories open that year, and that wasn't until April. But people, they put somebody, which was a good sense, in charge of your money, because you know we would just thrown it away. But every time I went to Mr. Dansby, well, now, how can I help you? Knowing full well how he could help me. And I'd have to go through that every month. And now, what do you need that for? He was something. He was not only a good president, he was a good everything else that he had to be. And that made it good for the students. But he was in charge of my money. And it wasn't but $12 and something after I moved to Homes. We stayed in Homes. I stayed on Montgomery Street. She has a son, you don't know him, so no use of my looking at you, who sang beautifully and had a pretty good education. The husband was a minister. But I stayed with her for a little while. But then I found me a cheaper place. And I'm on Deer Park Street. And I went to that family. He was a minister, and she was an excellent cook. They cooked our meals and gave us the big meals and breakfast. And I paid $12 a month. I don't know what other people paid. But where could you and I get anything for a week for $12? But we did it for a month. They did it for us for a month. I think the experience of living in people's home, because I had never lived in anybody's home but my own, was good for us. And people were nice to us. But you have to know how to be nice to people for people to be nice to you. That's my theory. And I stayed with this lady. I can't think of that young boy's name, her son's name, but he had a very brilliant musical career. But it seems to me that he went to school somewhere in Atlanta, the place I can't remember. But I stayed with her. I stayed with the lady named Mrs. Perkins on, it's off Dalton Street, just before you get to Central Street is where she lived. But the people that I stayed with, I enjoyed living with. And we were there much longer than we had expected to be, because I'm sure you've experienced building on campuses and how slow they can move sometimes. And these were very slow. But the people that we stayed with were nice to live with, and we enjoyed it. I had some good roommates. One of them was from Grenada, not from Grenada, but from outside Grenada. It wasn't Holcomb. I can't think of it. But she came after I had been there for a while. She was older than I was, but she had been out in the country, wherever they lived, and had had her schooling interrupted. That's school, those are the people.
Were there events while you were a student here that stand out in your memory? Were there things that happened?
Yes, we'd have, and don't necessarily put this first. But we had something called a festival every year to raise money to help with the schooling. Not with just our schooling, but with the school. And it was really a carnival with all sorts of things. The dance group would be in Dansby Hall or somewhere, and another group would be over here, and we'd get things done and raise money. And it didn't seem like a lot of money, but it helped a whole lot. And other yearly events, like the Homecoming Queen and that kind of thing.
You mentioned that you went to Ohio State for a master's in elementary education.
No, not Ohio.
Not Ohio State.
Yes. I'm thinking of something else now. Yeah, it was Ohio State.
What was it like to go to Ohio State from Jackson State?
Just what you think. I'm going to answer that better. There was no place on the campus for me to live. So I lived with a lady, Mrs. Hawkins, who had kept students for years. And she knew what to tell you to watch out for and all that kind of thing, because she had dealt with students so long. She had two daughters, a son and a grandson. The son was a master musician, but he did not church music, but the other music. His name was Logan Hawkins. He lived in Detroit, as I said, I think. But he'd come home to visit, and we'd get to hear him and, you know, talk with him, and that was always good. I lived off campus. Nowhere on campus for me to stay at that time that I knew of or that I could pay for.
Was that because of segregation or because you couldn't afford the cost of living on campus?
I think it was both, if I remember correctly. We were segregated, and all the students that I knew lived off campus, and there were people there. Well, Lee Williams, who this building is the name for, and I worked together here for a long time. But he was the one who really persuaded me to go to Ohio State, because he had been, at least he was going at that time. And they gave me a lot of good tips. For instance, they told me, whatever I did, don't get Ruth Strikes for my advisor. So I knew not to get Dr. Strikes. I got the woman's name, and I was trying to think of her name the other day and thought of it, and now it's gone again. There were two women in elementary education at that time, and they told me to get the other one, and I may think of it before we're through. And that's who I got, and she was a wonderful person, just wonderful, good, very good. Ruth Strikes taught in a hat, a beautiful hat, every day of the school year. The other lady was just plain. She didn't care what you wore, you know, or anything like that. Ruth Strikes was just the opposite. She had to be dressed correctly, and she wore some beautiful hats, and she wore one every day through the class. I don't mean to work and back home. She taught him. I had a man who did children's literature that was very good. When Ruth Strikes left, she must have retired while I was there. She told us we could go in there and get all of the books we wanted, and she had just worlds of books. And this man was a teacher himself, and certainly didn't need, to grab books, but he did. And I guess it was sensible after all, because you don't have to pay for them, it's better. But he was a children's literature teacher, and his name escapes me at the moment, but he looked like Charles Lawton. He was big like Charles Lawton, and just like Charles Lawton. But he was a very good children's literature teacher. I don't know where he is either. I was in New York once. This is long years after I graduated from Ohio State. And I don't know what I was there for, but I did some things for Hunter College and for one other school there. And my sister, fortunately, Mildred, got some scholarships too, and she got to go to the same places that I went to. So when he found out that she was giving those books away, I mentioned it, and he beat everybody else grabbing books when he found, after I told him about it. But there wasn't enough books for all of us, and that was very generous of her. I guess she decided she didn't have any more use for them. I don't quite decide that, I'm gonna keep some of my books no matter what until I can't use them at all, but she didn't feel that way. So she did that, and he didn't hesitate to grab books as if he made almost nothing, had good salaries, Speaking of salaries, we haven't talked about salaries at all. Let's hold that until you are ready for me, and we'll get to something about salaries. Because we can come up until today almost with salaries and the difference in the salaries and that kind of thing. Teachers didn't make much then. They don't make much now. I guess we never will make much. In fact, I'm out. I retired in '84. I worked at Jackson State from 1944 until 1984.
What brought you back to Jackson State?
I never did leave. When I graduated, I started work there. Mr. Reddick had the idea that we needed to do something for rural people. So he had the idea that we needed to adopt one of those schools that we worked in with student teachers. And we did that. And that's where I first worked. I first worked at Jackson State's Rural Demonstration School. And that was at Florence, Mississippi? I believe Florence was the closest place to us. We had a school, and we used the same materials and ideas that they used in the campus laboratory school. When I graduated from that, when I graduated from college, I was going to work, looking for a job. But Mr. Reddick again came through and set up this school called, the name that it bore when we got it. You never think I'd forget it, but I did. I can't think of it right now. But Jackson State adopted that school. Even before we adopted it, when I was a student, we would go on Sundays and Saturdays and other days and take programs. It might be a Sunday evening program, but we'd gather people. And Juliet Blackburn family is the one I rode with out there the first time I went. And their mother told them that I was going to ride with them. We got on our way. Julie said, "What is your name?" I said, "Lottie Williams." She said, "Well, Lottie, we don't allow anybody to ride in our car." And her mother said, "Julie, what did you say?" It embarrassed her mother so much. But Julie was just a little girl, and she didn't know she was stirring up anything. But she told me that. She said, "We don't allow anybody to ride in our car." But I rode. And we were going out. I used to do acrobatic stunts, and that's what I was doing that night. Some stunts on the program, on the stage. Others were singing. Groups were singing. Some were doing readings. I don't recall anybody telling a story. Somebody might have, but I just can't think of it about it at the moment. Now, my classmates, I know I'm skipping some, but I'm trying to tell you some things while I think about them, because you can change them around. Dee Rhodes was in my class. A girl whose father pastored, what's the church right behind the college? It's not. They have a church on Lamar Street. You ought to know that. Let me see, who do we have? The Binghams are members, the young man that does my work.
Christ Temple Holiness Church on Lamar?
Yeah. No, but it's not Christ the King.
No, Christ Temple
That's right.
Holiness.
Her daddy pastored the church in Washington Addition, and that's where they live. But Lee was in my class, and she just died just this past year. Cleophas Bingham Sanders was a classmate. Rose Howard Robinson joined us, but we were juniors. She went 2 years at Clarksdale, whatever that was called, and did her first 2 years there, and then she transferred to Jackson State. And she's here in Jackson now. In fact, Rose, Leah, and I believe, are the only 3 people still, and even the men are gone. We're the 3 that I recall, and I think the only 3 that are here.
What did you do after you worked for the Rural Demonstration School?
I came to the campus and worked in the demonstration school on campus. I've always worked for Jackson State. Always. Nobody else. I helped with paraprofessionals out of New York with the Hunter College and other groups. And I gave some programs for them, for people in Mississippi. And paraprofessionals was one of them. That's a.
How long did you work for the demonstration school? And what roles did?
I worked there from the time I started until they closed the school in '65. My daughter got a chance to go 1 year, and I was good mad with Mr. Reddix for closing it just when my child got ready. When his child got ready, Shirley, he was there for much longer. I taught Shirley, and they went to Africa the year that I taught her, so she wasn't there the whole time. When I got through there, I went to the campus for something else. I guess I went to the English department for a while. And I did not have a degree in English, but I loved English, and I applied myself a great deal.
How did the campus change over those years while you were here? How did you see the campus change and evolve?
Oh, I can't even begin to describe it. Well, don't put that down. I'm going to try to describe it. At first, there was Shivers Hall, Air Hall, where we are, because this is the oldest, isn't it? And what's right across from here, where we used to live? Starts with a B, I think.
Barrett.
Right, Barrett Hall. Those were the main buildings. Barrett, Air, and those were named for some men, weren't they?
Yes.
Do you have anything at all about the man that's building his name for, or is that a separate thing? B.F. Roberts. You don't have, you're not supposed to get anything on him.
You can, yeah.
You can say anything you want to
Yes.
say.
Well, he was Mr. Reddick's friend. Mr. Reddick's was from Van Cleve, Mississippi, but he had gone to school somewhere in Alabama, some kind of trade school or something, and he made quite a few friends, and many of them sent their children here. Well, I don't know whether many, but some did. One young woman was named Vivian Stansfield. Vivian Stansfield. Are you familiar with how Erskine Hawkins and the boys that started out at Alabama State and the band got together, which they kept together for a long, long time after they graduated? Well, this girl could play one of those songs that started off with a piano. She could play it exactly like Erskine Hawkins and the boys played it, and we kept her doing that. But I was telling somebody the other day, we were talking about Vivian, and Vivian left, graduated, went back home, married, got sick, died, didn't live a long time. But she was excellent with just, nobody had taught her. She could hear and just get it like it was. Well, her people knew Mr. Reddick's, and that's how she got here. A girl that I knew from Lexington, and I met her again in Ohio, and her name escaped. Laverne. It was either, I believe it was Stansberry, was a person who took advantage of a lot of things and was at Ohio State when I was there, and married, but she's gone. Everybody's gone. But she was a good student. There were lots of good students who really wanted to do something. Now, I was telling them, maybe I've told them a lot of times, the young man that I used to dance a lot with was named, his name escapes me, but he didn't graduate. He went 2 years from Greenwood. He went 2 years, for some reason, decided to go, give up his education and go to Detroit. He got to Detroit and fell in with a riotous group, and he didn't live long. It just took him right down. Lester B. Latham was his name. And I was telling David the other day that I had little enough sense to let those boys throw me over their shoulders and between their legs and all the stuff they do now. I did. and they were good and strong, but Lester was really the best one. But he just decided that he would, not finish. I don't know how they make those decisions, but a lot of people do.
You've said a lot about Jacob Reddix. Can you talk about some of the other presidents that you interacted with?
Yeah, wasn't that many. Did I mention Dean Sampson? He's not a president, but he
Oh,
was
please. Tell
Yeah.
us about Dean Sampson.
Dean Sampson was here when my oldest sister was here. So he was a young man, at the time. Taught math and was good in it, and not very patient with people that he taught. He didn't teach me, but he did a lot of other. He taught my sisters. And other presidents.
Or faculty members or administrators.
Okay. I mentioned Mrs. Blackburn. Oh, Z. Alfin Anderson. Z-E-E. Alfin, A-L-F-I-N. Anderson. And she finally married one of the teachers here who was a good science teacher. Z. Alfin Anderson married Barron first. You know where his name is somewhere?
I knew she became a baron. I knew.
Oh, you knew she became a baron. He was an excellent science teacher. He put a lot of humor in his classes, but you learned, and he didn't play around when it came to getting the book. And she sang beautifully, Italian and everything. Taught music. And I'm trying to think who else was here when they were here about that time. Z. Mrs. Blackburn. They were two good English teachers.
I know you mentioned Dean Sampson as a math teacher. I know John A. Peoples was also a math teacher. Can you
Right.
talk about Dr. Peoples?
Yeah, but I was in college when John was here. They talk about, well, I'm so-and-so, I'm just so-and-so old. Yeah, they were older, but they were older, and I've told them this, some of them, they were older when they came. I had turned 17 that year, and most of them had been to the Army, or if they hadn't been to the Army, they were just older than I was. That's all it was. There weren't a lot of young people at the time. Do you know who made those things?
No, I don't.
I asked because they look like somebody that I knew here, but I can't place who it was, and they may not even be. I talked to a young man, because he still does my income taxes, whose name is John Eden. They used to work in a business office. He and Junior in our church,
After June.
yeah, came at the same time. A girlfriend of mine came, and she's dead, but she was from Georgia. Because of Mr. Dansby's having come from Georgia, he brought a lot of people in. A lot of them were very good in whatever they were doing, so other people began to bring them in from Georgia. Sampson had graduated at Morehouse, I believe. He was very smart. He taught my oldest sister, but he never taught me. Somebody else I mentioned that didn't teach me, but I knew them. Z. Alvin Anderson, Mrs. Blackburn, Barron. And I know more men than that. My mind's clouding up. I'm not thinking of them. One of Mr. Barron's favorite expressions was, if you thought of something and mentioned it in class, well, you anticipate me. He loved to say, you anticipate me. And of course we didn't anticipate him at all, but he was patient with his knowledge. I really don't remember any teachers that I had that were really bad teachers. And when I say bad, I'm talking about how they taught the students or their relationship with the students. We didn't have a lot of people who had frictions with teachers.
Can you describe Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander?
Oh yeah. Let me begin. Where's my book, David? See, he didn't buy that for me. You see who's using it. There's nothing in there? I can remember most of it, I think. I was president of student government my senior year in college. I beat John Floyd and a lot of others that you met, but John never could remember that I beat him, but I did. But John died about 2 years ago in Detroit. But trying to think of something.
I want to know about Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander.
That's what I was trying to think of. I was about to tell you. I met Margaret when I introduced her during my senior year here at Jackson State. We were just excited out of our heads because Margaret hadn't been, out of school, hadn't gotten that thing for, which college that gave the young people their,
Yale.
yeah, young people, Yale, young people. And she was going around the country giving concerts, whatever they called them. And she was coming here, and when I found out I was going to introduce Margaret Walker, I was so happy. And she came to give us a concert on Sunday, one Sunday. And we just enjoyed her. We thought we had been to heaven and back, We got to hear Margaret Walker Alexander, and I was especially glad because I got to introduce her. One of the first things Margaret said when she got ready to make her presentation was, when I decided that I wanted to do poetry, my father said, talking about her father, said, all poets are fools. All poets are fools. And she always told that when she got up to give a presentation of some kind, because Margaret was far from a fool. And her parents were both teachers, and she was born in Meridian, Mississippi. But she really claimed New Orleans as home because that's where they were living when she started to move around country, jobs in Livingston and different places. She taught the kids enjoyed it. She never taught me. I was working. In fact, I had been working about 5 years before Margaret got here, because I started in 1940. No, 44. But as I said, we lived on campus together first. They stayed in those old barracks, soldiers' barracks down there. Families did. I lived in the dormitory. My husband said he got me out of there and put some pork chop poultices under my belt, and I put some weight on. And he was a good cook and enjoyed cooking it. And I certainly enjoy having him cook. And this one cooks well too. He's not my husband, but my daughter got her one too. Anyway, Margaret had worked in Chicago with Wright, and my husband and her father and I bought the shoe shop. His shoe shop was just a block down from here before you get to some of those short streets in there. But we bought that shop from Richard Wright's mother. The shop had, as you know, had the shop on this side, and he rented this side for a barber shop. And the building had a house back of the shops. And we rented that out until we could no longer rent it without spending a lot of money, and we didn't have that to spend, and wouldn't have spent it, I don't think, if we had had it. But Richard Wright's mother lived with her sister. In that book where she describes the family there, one of her cousins was my classmate, Gladys Wilson. And I asked her after the book came out and I had read it, I said, "How did you like the book?" We were talking one day. She said, "What, that thing you talking about?" They didn't think one thing about it was good. She told too much of the family business, family news, and so they didn't want that to happen. Gladys is the only one that I talked with about it, but I imagine if Gladys felt that way, that some of those others. Gladys had a sister and a brother, Dumas, from Natchez. But that was their house next door to my husband's shop. That was Wilson House. But the thing that we bought was the shop and the house and the other shop with it. But so far as what Gladys thought of the book, she didn't think much of it. I didn't talk with any of the others, so I really don't know. But I imagine if Gladys didn't like it, and they felt he had told more that they wanted him to tell, that the rest of them felt that way, but I don't know that. But it was a good buy. In fact, we kept it until a few years ago, even after we left Jackson.
What was your relationship with Margaret like?
We were good friends. She never taught me. We were good friends. We were members of some groups together, and that was it. And we were the kinds of friends that visited each other. We didn't live far from each other. And she'd sometimes send me booklets, none of which I brought with me. I've learned that my books get away from me very quickly. One of Margaret's daughters has not a book, but I had some good Oscar Peterson, and she came over and borrowed them, and I made all of them sign, write up what they were getting and put their name by. Didn't do a bit of good with some people, and little Margaret was one of them. We called her Little Margaret, and Little Margaret was one of them. She still has my records. She was living here again then, but she moved back to Chicago. I went to her house once here, and I believe Margaret was home. She just didn't come to the door and open the door because she knew I wanted my records and she wasn't going to give them to me. But things like that can get away from you. Even writing their names does not help, I found out, with some people. They don't mean to turn them back to you. But what's the oldest girl? Marion. Marion tried to do some writing. Did you know about that?
Tell us about it.
Well, all I know is that her mother didn't think much of it. You see, she came along in the era when they were using all kinds of vulgarity and all of that. And Margaret just thought I had too much of that. And I guess a lot of people did who didn't like to read that kind of stuff. Her mother didn't think that much of it. And she never tried anything else that I know of. And she's in Chicago, and she is huge now. And doesn't do that much, I don't think, with trying to write. Not that I know of. But she was the only one that I know that she had 4 children, as you know. She was the only one that I knew that even tried. Now, James has a good mind, but I've never known him to try anything with writing.
In your years at Jackson State, were there other people who you were particularly close to who we should talk about? You've mentioned a lot of folks.
As you have, and I'm trying to pull somebody out right now. Oh, Mrs. Blackburn. Who? Oh yeah, Mrs. Lane. This is the lab school, and she was one of the she was the primary teacher there, and one that the children feared, because Liam was something else. But we were very good friends. And I don't know who they sold their house here, right here on Valley Street. I know you don't know. And you probably don't know. Oh, a cousin of yours. Yes, I do know. One of those Willis girls. One's husband used to pastor Western Washington Edition. That's church that a lot of these students went to. I joined Fair Street when I joined. Right, College Hill. I joined Fair Street when I joined church, and I taught a Sunday school class like I did at Fair Street for a while and enjoyed it. I would not join the Sunday school that I taught in because I liked Reverend Greer's preaching at Fair Street, and that's where I joined. I was trying to think of some more people. As many teachers as I had.
It's a lab school.
What's a lab school? Colleges sometimes, for their own good, and for the good of the faculty members, children, and other people who can pay that fee, there's a fee, will have good elementary schooling, some good teachers. See, we put on an operetta every year, and when Margaret was, she didn't get to go there but 1 year. When she was in that fat thing that year, there was a basketball coach here. What was the little girl's dad's name? The little girl that had to come out to my house, they lived on campus, but she made her mother bring her to my house so she and Margaret could come together, and her mother was silly enough to do that. Our children make us do some silly things.
Was that Harrison Wilson?
No, but let me tell you about Harrison. I had the nicest letter from him. The second boy is dead, and the oldest boy writes a beautiful letter, and they speak well. The boy who was the quarterback for what, David? Russell.
Russell for the Seahawks.
The Seahawks. He was quarterback for Seahawks starting this year. I mean, last year now. But Ben just couldn't get to that thing that the students gave for me because of Harry B's death. And he had to stay there and help her, the wife and children and all that. But he does very well. Russell, the grandchild, is the one that I was speaking of then. And you know I'm not a ball fan. But David saw to it that I watched that one when he began in the fall. And we were thinking how fortunate he was to be a first-year person and to have the quarterback position. And that was Harrison's grandchild. It's Harrison Jr. who passed on. I didn't know his wife nor children. In fact, I don't know Benji's. But I have seen Benji 2 or 3 times since they left here. Well, since they left Virginia, because they went to Virginia when they left here. And I guess, Harrison spoke to me the other day and said something.
He sent an email talking about which at the playoff time. Wishing it.
Okay. He did what? Tell me again.
An email.
Oh, yeah. At the time when he couldn't get there. Mm-hmm. He hated that he couldn't make it, but you know, I knew his brother did, and he was the only man left. No, his dad is still living, right?
No. Deceased with John.
Sure? Yeah, he is the only man.
No, John. One went to school with me.
Oh, I forgot.
Can you talk about Jackson State in the 1950s and 60s and what it was like during the height of the civil rights movement in Mississippi?
Well, I can't really say a lot about it because I wasn't, involved on the campus a great deal. But don't worry, my sister Mildred would get involved in anything, and she worked with them a lot. A group of Deltas came from New York, Jeannie somebody, and my sister was supervisor of elementary education for the state of Mississippi when she passed. She would tell those people anything and go wherever she wanted to go, whenever she wanted to go, if she were with a civil rights group. When Reverend Johnson and the people from my church did the sit-ins and whatever they would do on Fair Street, I would never go, but she would. She would be there. Whether it was a work day or not, she always arranged. She'd go to the Delta when those people that I mentioned would come. She just did it, and she never got any reprimand for it. She felt it was her duty. I didn't feel it was my duty to get my head stuck where I might get cut off or something, but she did, and she went. And we were just the two. See, when my mother died, I was 10 years old. I remember her very well, but sister remembers more, and she did more along that line. And she wasn't afraid to do anything. She never even mentioned getting killed or something bad happening to her. I guess there were a lot of other people like her. Because Fannie Lou Hamer's nephew, is that her nephew with?
Yes, Eddie Fair.
What's it?
Eddie
Fair, yeah. Well, Fannie Lou told my sister and those people who would be with her some stories you just wouldn't believe about what those people did to them as human beings. Just sticking their private parts with pokers and guns, that were not being shot and all that kind of thing. I never did go on in those trips, but she went on them.
What was the city and this area like when Medgar Evers was assassinated in 1963?
I'm glad you asked me that. We were in this bed sleep because you were too young to remember. You probably remember the date, do you? I don't think you do. You were too young. But they woke me up. What year was that? 6?
63.
63.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Your daddy was living, right?
Definitely.
She said definitely. And Chris's husband, you know, Marshall. What was his name? Marshall Fraser. Marshall called us very early. And we just didn't have any day. You know, everything was just so twisted around and everybody was torn up. It was such an awful thing. And all of us we just kind of went wild, you know. Some people did things. I didn't go anywhere and join any group or anything, but lots of people did. Because we just loved Omega. And you thought that Omega was taking a whole lot of chances, which he did, and one of them finally caught up with him. But I wasn't surprised. Was your family surprised?
No,
Do you remember?
No, I don't
No, she
remember.
didn't.
Well, those of us who were old enough to understand what had happened were very upset. And it happens, as you know, early in the morning.
What about the shootings that happened on campus in 1970?
I wasn't on campus. Yes, I was. Yeah, those shootings. We had several shootings.
Gibbs Green is the one
Yeah.
I'm particularly
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, I was there. I was working. It was 70 something, wasn't it?
1970.
And don't write yet because I don't know what I'm going to say. I didn't know Gibbs. I met his wife afterward. And she lives in Phoenix somewhere. I saw her once there when I was there visiting you once. And I told her about you, but we never got to meet. But the Gibbs boy's wife, I believe, one of the boys' wives, lives there. When that happened, I had a consultant from Columbia. I had gone to school at Columbia the summer before, I believe. And her name was Florence Green something, but it wasn't Green. It wasn't just Green, and it wasn't Green Hoe, but it was Green something. Anyway, she had come down to do a workshop for me and the teachers. I was to take her to the airport. I no longer drive, and I quit myself. Nobody stopped me. I ran into my own garage door, and I said, Lottie, it's time for you to hang it up now. Just don't do that anymore. And that's what I did. But anyway, she was here, and I was to take her to the airport. She called me early, because she was living on, I don't know where she was living. I started to say on campus, but it wasn't on campus. It was in one of these hotels. And she said, don't come and pick me up. It's just too dangerous. Don't come. I'll get to the airport. And she did. And she was scared to death. She thought that we were going to have a lot more shooting. And I thought we were going to have some more, too. So she didn't come back to the campus when she got through that night. We were to give her the party at Lillian Lane's house down Eastview, on Eastview. And when that happened, we had Mama and all ready to keep you that night. When that happened, we decided we didn't need to leave out our houses, so we didn't. So that just didn't, happen. And I'm sure she was glad, because she was still scared the next morning and thought I should be much more careful. But nobody had to tell me to be careful. I was going to do that. Now, Mildred was different. She would have gone and gotten in the middle of it. I'm not so I'm not so good about getting in the middle of stuff when the guns are involved, so I didn't go out at all. And I don't really remember whether she went at that time or not. It was torn up. People were scared. My visitor was just really undone. And she did get herself to the airport. And I heard from her after she got back to New York. But I didn't try. She didn't want me to try, and I didn't want to try to get her to the airport. We had some good people to visit our campus at that time, black, white, anything you wanted. And they were taking chances too, because they didn't know whether somebody was going to break out with fire, or not. But I guess overall, it wasn't as bad as we expected. Not as many people died. We didn't have as many upsetting kinds of things on campus as we had anticipated. And I would participate in the campus things, but I wasn't the person to go off campus looking for trouble. We had enough here to keep us busy and keep us looking after people.
Do you remember when Dr. Alexander founded the Institute for the Study of the History, Life, and Culture of Black People in
I sure
1968?
don't. I can't help you there. I'm sure I must have it somewhere in some papers. Like I had worlds of newspaper articles about Opera South because I worked with it closely. Mrs. Blackburn worked with it, Dr. Mosley's wife, and I'm where his daughter is. And she's married now and lives there. And does wonderful things with the name, I can't think of what you call them now, but pictures, things that you put on the wall to accompany stuff like this.
And what did you do with Opera South?
I was with the Guild. We had an Opera South Guild to raise money and encourage people to come to the operas. I served 2 or 3 officers, including the president of the Guild. Mrs. Blackburn worked with it, as I said before. Mrs. Mosley, this child's mother, and lots of other people. But I gave all that stuff away and I can't recall of it. But my fear is that they have thrown it away. We went to look for stuff from the lab school. You remember that? And whoever was in charge of putting away stuff or throwing away stuff had done away with all those children's grades and everything. That hurt my heart because that didn't make sense. But that's what happened to it. And that's why I just surmised that if they would do that with the lab school, as long as it was there, and a different kind of school, and this wasn't a school, that they didn't even look back at that material.
What do you think about Jackson State today when you see campus now?
I think it's really a lesson to learn to just get on this campus and get somewhere. Because you really can't do it too well. And I haven't met the new president. I guess we're accustomed to few buildings and, ease in getting around, being able to walk from one building to another without having, you had to drive a pretty good little bit to get here today. And I came once and they had a new person who was I don't know his nationality, but he was not an American white person or an American black person. But when he saw me and I was asking somebody in one of those booths something, he attempted to tell me. I didn't know what he was saying, and I'm sure he didn't know what I was saying, because we never did communicate. We just didn't do it. We couldn't do it. But I found my way. I was trying to find this building, and I found this building. I must have been coming here to see the institute, because I don't know of anything I've been to over here other than that.
If you could, what would you say to Jackson State students today?
If I could, I would say, please take advantage of the opportunities which you have here, many of which are free. Even those that aren't free are worth you working for, studying for, and being involved. See, you have young people who don't intend to be involved in anything. We may not have a lot of them here on this campus, but they are such animals. They just don't want to participate. They don't want to do anything. So I would say take advantage of every opportunity that you have. Work hard, do your best. You never know what's coming your way. I never would have thought that I would have gotten through college and had all the opportunities that I had. I'll get back to Mr. Reddick's. When they had whatever they had for him here a year or two ago, well, I was here and on that program. I hear from Shirley occasionally. Nobody hears from Shirley that much. Mildred Kelly, I think, is supposed to be a person who stays in contact with her. But the last time I tried to get some information from Mildred, she hadn't heard from her, so I don't. And she's not altogether well. So that may be part of the trouble. But I would tell them to take advantage of whatever opportunities they have. We sometimes think that the opportunity is no good, but once you get into it, you find out that it's good for you. It may be good for your children. It may be good for other people that you know, other family members. You can get a lot of help, and you can give some help when you take advantage of it.
We've been talking for a long time. We've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that we need to, that you need to tell us?
Can you think of anything?
You had started talking about B.F. Roberts, and that's the building
Oh.
right next door to us, and I just
Mhm.
wondered if you remember.
He was the, whatever they call the head cook, the chef, top chef. He was full of Indian blood, it seemed to me, and I know he had some Indian in it. Good at his job always was one that kept him away from home. And he had a wife and a house full of children. But he knew exactly how to keep it going. Mr. Edis got him because they had gone to school together in Alabama. And he stayed here a long time. He had one son who was with the flying group, the Negro.
Yes. Lawrence Roberts.
Yeah. And I don't remember how many other children, but he had boys and girls and lots of them. But he kept that home going and kept the children in line, his children. And he did all these banquets and stuff we have. And I'm sure you have many more of them now because you have better facilities. But we had enough of them. and we have everything just like it was supposed to be. The crowds weren't as large, of course. But we had the food, and we had the visitors, whoever they were. And we just weren't behind, in our operations. We really weren't. After Mr. Reddick's, who do we have right after Mr. Reddick's? We had Lyons. We had somebody whose name started with an A. Yeah, Peoples came right after Mr. Reddick's.
Oh.
In fact, John was Mr. Reddick's student. He was good in math, and Mr. Reddick was good in math. So he was the first one. But then we had somebody whose name began with an H.
Hefner. Hefner, James Hefner.
Right. We had Hefner, whose name began with an L.
Lyons.
Lyons. Well, then you have the rest of them, huh? After Lyons. Okay. I knew all of them. I worked whatever they asked me to do. Jackson College is just in my blood, and it'll be here forever.
Thank you very much. Is anything else?
What about you starting the Early Childhood Education Center? How did that come about?
Oh, Margaret, you making me forget something. I mean, you helping me remember something. We had a nursery school, and Ida Johnson worked in that for a while, Uncle John's wife. And it was in the basement of this building. And she enjoyed it and did a good job, but it was not like it is now. We had somebody from Atlanta who ran that for a while. I can't think of her. And Ruth Rosamond Deese. Is Barbara Deese still working here, or has she retired? She was in...
I believe Dr. Deese is retired.
Okay. Well, Barbara Deese and some of the others worked in that. I keep pointing somewhere else, and it was in this building that they worked, and they called it the lab. They called us the lab school. They called these people the nursery or the kindergarten. She worked in it. Ida Johnson Floyd, Ruth Rosamond Deese. That's Billy Deese's mother. Then people I didn't know. Some people I didn't know.
And what was the purpose and what did you do in the Early Childhood Education Center?
Okay. We got interested in early childhood education, very interested in it. Mr. Reddick was very interested because Shirley was in school. And we're always interested in where our children are. So we started working. Ida Johnson Floyd ran it. She didn't have any special nursery training. At first the teachers didn't have, but then we got to the place where we used people who really had training. And Mr. Reddick, somebody came for early childhood and put us in the mood for it. The one that I said was here when the shooting went on, she was one of them. But he brought in people from other schools to help us organize and get the thing ready. And we were in this building too on the first floor. And it didn't take us that long because we had good help helping us. And at first, they didn't cut the lab school out until '65.
Right, and the Early Childhood Education Center was started when? The one that's over here today, the one that's over at the education building.
I'd have to be looking at something with the date on it. I don't remember.
So what was your involvement with it?
I was the person who directed the first one. We could see the need for some good early childhood education, and I still see the need for it because we don't have near enough of that kind of thing going on with the college even. some people don't bother with it a great deal, but there's nothing more important to me than starting children out right in the beginning. And they can learn a lot more than you think, and a lot more than you want of some things. But it's a good thing. And what did I do to get ready for it?
You went a lot of places, I remember that.
Oh, yeah. What happened was Carnegie, Ford Foundation gave me some money at first. Then Mr. Reddick's responsible for all this. Then Carnegie gave money. And the woman who worked with us was a lady from New York whose name escapes me at the moment. What was that woman's name? I will not ever forget them, their names, but I have. Anyway, Carnegie gave us money. They gave me money to travel all over this country and observe, take notes, talk with, that kind of thing, with the people. Early childhood education was getting real important. And I had the opportunity to visit from New York to Florida and from Chicago to Los Angeles, visiting various schools. I went to a lot of states. And there was just one woman who really acted up. She asked me, you know, who was this and who was that and what was I doing this and that. A lot of unnecessary questions. And the man who was over that program, everybody who was over the program was a doctoral person at that school. And he was the one in Chicago at this school. That was the only place where somebody told me, you know, questioned me unusually long. And she said something insulting, which I can't remember because I really wasn't thinking about it because I knew she wasn't over the program. And she told me, he told me, he said when the man came the next day, he wasn't there that day, he said, they tell me so-and-so, I don't think he called any names, but you had difficulty getting in. And I said, yes. And we talked about it. He said, well, she does not run this program, I run it. And you just come right on, do whatever you came to do, and we'll help you. He was very nice, everybody was. When I got to Jacksonville, Arlene's home, the man who gave me the invitation to come and who did all the arranging and all, and when he started to take me to the hotel, he said, who put you in this hotel? I said, you did. He said, what? He didn't even remember putting me in there, but he did. And it was a nice place. It was an older hotel, and that's what he meant by that. It wasn't one of the nice new ones. But I had good, comfortable arrangements for eating and everything else. It was really just an education in itself, to go to all those places, meet all those people, observe all the programs, take notes and get back with them. And then begin to get the program going. And to keep consultants coming in. We had money for that from Carnegie. And all of it might not have been from Carnegie. Some of them might have been from Ford and the Southern Education Foundation helped us some. And later on, my sister Mildred got a chance to go and visit a lot of places that I visited. And she had some good people to come to Mississippi to help her. When she got the chance to go, the superintendent, whose name I don't even remember, objected, and we can't spare you and all that. the girl who was over from New York said, "Don't worry, Mildred, you are going on the trip," and she did.
What was Mildred's job?
She was supervisor, state supervisor of elementary education. She was a graduate of Tuskegee. She got with a program that Grambling was handling, and she enjoyed it, and they did wonderful things together. So that's where she came in. I got all of mine at Jackson State.
What happened when you got back from traveling? How did you get the program started here?
You keep bringing me back to that. What we did, Barnett, was have a lot of meetings, invite a lot of people because we had the money to do it, and they would come and give their input. We'd listen to that and take what part of that we wanted, and that's how we got it together. It was really a matter of consulting with people who had programs running already. Is it time to pick up your little boy?
No, not yet. We're okay. We're doing fine.
Oh, good. That's how I got started.
Okay.
Mm.
And what did you do as a director?
I directed. Marinette, I did not teach, if that's what you're asking. Karen Bishop, Ophelia Kelly, Coach Wilson's wife, who's dead, Anna. And those people were the teachers. I usually had 3 teachers. Are you hungry? Sleepy?
No, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. So I did, you know, I said I directed, but that's really what I did. I didn't teach any of the classes.
So how did the kids come? I mean, were the kids from just faculty members or what?
Oh no, we took anybody who had the money, you know, and got here early enough. We did that. They thought that I started to say that a little while ago, and something made me change, that we gave this operetta every year. That was one of our big things and one of our drawing cards. And see, we had the music faculty to call on, so we didn't have to we had to keep them quiet and get them up to the auditorium and away from the auditorium. We had more than that to do. We had to help with parts and helping the children learn their parts and learn to say them correctly. But that was a drawing card. Newton, Desi Newton's daughter, who lives in New York. That child lived to get to the lab school so she could be an operetta. And many children did. And their parents wanted them to come and be. Because it was a first class operetta. It wasn't any junk.
Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. We've really enjoyed it. I know we've talked for a long time, but it's very valuable, and we're very much glad that you came and joined us for this.
You aren't half as glad as I am. I'm really happy to be here. I'm glad to get a chance to talk about Jackson State. Next time somebody tries to talk with me, I probably will have forgotten. Do you know I will be 90 if the good Lord lets me live until June the 25th, 2013. I will be 90 years old.
You've got one thing. What's the name of the school? What's the name of the Early Childhood Education Center now?
It's you're gonna make me remember that it's the Lottie W. Thornton.
That's an important point.
Right. I just hadn't thought of it.
Well, thank you very much.
And thank you. And tell your mother I said hello, because I know her.
I will do that for sure. We need to get you